So this is today's video, an After Effects tutorial, because I didn't really vloggable or interesting today, and I got up at like 1 p.m. because I was up till 3:30 editing, which was fun. But yeah, so today's video is just this tutorial, which I will also upload separately. Because, yeah, I like After Effects, because it's really, the things you can do with it are just amazing. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this, and yeah, the next couple videos should be, especially next week, should be much more vlog-like. So yeah, hope you enjoy my tutorial. If you like After Effects, it's really cool. Bye. Alright, should be recording. So, this is a tutorial on how to use the basic features of the trim path tool, or the trim path function in After Effects. So we're going to start it with creating an Illustrator document. It's just simple 4K 3840 by 2160, because why not? It's animation. We can do make it as big as we want. Just a little artboard here. Then I'm going to draw some, like using grids because I'm a perfectionist. Just a circle with no fill and say 50-point stroke, and a square that has a fill and no stroke. And in the middle of the circle we might as well put one that has both. So let's put a red, deep pinkish red stroke on it. So the little shapes that we're going to deal with here, because they look kind of cool. Well, they're going to show you how the path function works. We can do one more thing that's just an arbitrary path coming off of the circle. So let's just put that around someplace. And looks like the circle is a ball of string in 2 dimensions with a little string coming out. I don't know. Anyway, so we're going to save this. Just going to save it to my desktop for now. Trimpath.ai, and we're done with Illustrator, although we can always go back to it later. So we're going to create a new After Effects project, a new composition. Let's make it 5 seconds long, and 29.97 4K, perfect, and name it Trim Path. Black background. Let's make the background on this white. Yeah. So now what I'm going to do is Command I import the trim path Illustrator file that we just created. So I'm going to drag that to our composition, and this is the important part: create shapes from vector layer. So right click on it, create shapes from vector layer, right there. And that'll hide this layer and create a shape layer with identical shapes on it. So you can see the Illustrator's file is still there, but the only problem is, like, we can delete that. It's still in, well, the Illustrator file is still referenced in our project here. But the trim path outlines, or this is the outlines that were created when I hit that. So this just made the vector file from Illustrator into vector shapes in After Effects. So the problem is we cannot edit these shapes in Illustrator anymore. We'd have to reapply all the, we'd have to edit the Illustrator file, which actually I can show you. We can just do that by going back in here. Say change the stroke to green and save that. So when we go back to After Effects, there it is. You can see that's it's green now, the stroke. So, but it's not green here because this is no longer a reference to the Illustrator file. We'd have to put this back in and create shapes from that, and then we have that there. So might as well work with that one now. So in any case, when we go to contents of the shapefile that we just created, a vector file, or vector shape outline file or layer that we just created here. Here are the groups. I can nudge it there. Let's not do that. So here are all the groups with the paths. We can change the stroke. We can change the screen mode here, or the you can change it to overlay or soft light, just like we blend modes from Illustrator or Photoshop that you should be familiar with, possibly. If you use the Creative Suite, you're probably familiar with them. So now we have this 5-second timeline of nothing happening. So what we're going to do, let's start with the square, because that's kind of the simplest one. So let's find which one's a square. Rename that. Square. So that's the square. Let's just hide everything else for now so we can just focus on the square. We're going to add, I'm actually going to do this to, the square is the only thing that's visible right now, so it added the trim path to it. So now we have our familiar keyframing to do. So trim path, when you're working with a solid, it looks like this basically. And this can create a really cool effect if you have a bunch of shapes together, like we have a bunch of squares, and like offset the trim path so we have one flipping up like that, then another one to the right doing the same thing, and that over and over again. That could create a really cool effect. So we're just going to create a simple little animation where it starts from full. Let's go 2 seconds in. Command left arrow, command, if you're on a Mac, command left arrow, command right arrow, moves by keyframe, or moves by frame. Just in case you didn't know, that's very, very useful. And option, that's just a side note, and option will change, option arrow keys will shift around the keyframe if you select a keyframe. You can select multiple keyframes and do that. Shift, you can hold to jump 20 frames or 10 frames at a side. So I'm going to go 2 seconds in, put the start to 100%, and leave that there, leave the end there. Let's make a keyframe for the end, and then go 2 seconds more, put the start, keep the start at 100, but put the end to 0. So that looks like it opens up the shape, and close it. So that's how the trim path function looks on a solid object. Now, when we apply it to a stroke, that's where things get in my opinion, much more useful, because there's so much you can do with this. So let's go to the let's start with the circle. So let's change the blend mode to normal. Even though there's nothing behind it, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so we're going to add trim paths. And that just, we had this one selected, so it only applied the trim path to this this group. Or, oh, sorry, I just applied it to all of the paths. But the trim path will, yeah. Oh yeah, oh, sorry, I just applied the trim path to everything in the contents, which that'll actually be faster, so as well. Just going to copy these keyframes, Command C, paste them there. Well, yeah, so I just applied the what we did to the square to everything, a little inadvertently, but yeah, so what we just did to the square, you can see the square does that, and then goes back to that. The strokes do the same. So the for some reason the circles, the starting point for the circles is always on the right side. I thought it was on the bottom, but yeah. So where the circle starts, when we have the start at, let's just hide these other things for now. I'm going to rename these so I know what I'm looking at. See, this is the circle. Circle. Let's call this string. Call that stroke square. Why not? So we have, let's just hide the square for now. We have this main circle. So when we apply the trim path to it, starting at 0% start and 100% end, it looks whole. So if we go to 100% start and 0% end, that's also whole. If we put 50-50, not 5-5, 50-50, basically if those values are identical, they will always be the circle will always disappear because we're showing 50% from the start and 50% from the end. So 100% start to 50% end is basically, so we start from 100% of the way to the end of the circle, or from the start of the circle. So the start of the circle is right there, this point here, basically, the right side of the point, or the 90 degrees on the circle if we're going from 0. So we are 100% of the way to the start at this point, and 0% of the way to the end at this point. So it's a full circle. If we go to 50% or this is getting closer and closer via percentage, or represented by percentage, it's getting closer and closer to 100% of the way to the end of the circle. So that's kind of how you can think about it. The circle starts here and ends here. To visualize this, we can visualize this maybe a little easier actually with a string that we made. So applying the trim path to the string, the start of the string is down here on the bottom right here. So that's 100% of the way to the start, and this is the end. So if we go to 100% of the way, if we go to 100% of the way to the end with 0% to the start, the end of the path you can see is going towards the end because it's 100% of the way to the end. So this is really cool when we have this going from, what did I do here? Going from 100% of the way to the end to disappearing basically to 100% of both. And we could do this would have the same effect if we had 50% and 50% or 77 and 77, as long as those are identical. Now that's 50% of the way through the path, and now they both, or the start and end, approach that at the same time. So it shrinks down to nothing, and then because we had these keyframes over here that put it back up to 100 and 0, the path is whole again. So I hope that that's basically all the principles that apply to or all the base principles that you need to know to start applying the trim path function. Yeah. So because this trim path is applying, this trim path kind of layer here is applying itself to all of these objects that we created. So the string shrinks down to in the middle here. It shrinks down to nothingness 50% of the way through. And with the squares, apparently the 50% or 50% of the way through the square is, rather than well, I'm just gonna duplicate the trim path, and in this case just show all the keyframes that we have. What I just did there is hit A a bunch of times until I had nothing in the drop down here, and then hit U, and that only shows the layers that have active keyframes. Extremely useful. So let's just hide this. Well, I actually have to hide these layers so that doesn't help right here. So if I had the first trim path that we use, make this go, instead of to the 50%, 0 and 0. Yeah. So the square, this is apparently 0% of the way through the square, and this is 100%. So it goes from 100, and the end is there, the start is there. So we start 0% of the way away from the start, 100%, or sorry, 0% from the start, 100% at the end, yeah. So the square collapses down like that, and then back up, because we have it go back to the original state. Well, actually, it's a reverse of the original state. but it ends up having the same effect. Yeah, so you can really see it works really well with the square that we have with the green outline here, because the stroke and fill kind of disappear at the same rate. So the stroke starts dragging the fill down with it, basically. Yeah, and that's why this square, since it doesn't have a stroke, if it did have a stroke, it would, well, see, it's going at the same rate as the, it starts out not changing at all until you get to a certain point. It's the same point at which the stroke comes up to basically clears this side of the square. And then the fill stops disappearing there because the stroke has to clear this this side of the bottom of the square now. Yeah. So that's basically it. Those are the fundamentals. And I'll play at the end of this video. I'll just play a simple animation I did using nothing but the trim path function. Actually, I'll show you that project. So this is the first thing I when I discovered the trim path function, well, I learned about it in class at SATE, I immediately went out and made this on the bus. It takes a while to render because there's a lot of shapes doing stuff. So this is using almost nothing but the trim path function. The only extra thing is the kind of lines here. That's using a repeater. I vary the rotation, but this is the fundamental piece that uses the trim path function. Yeah. So, if you have any questions, you can certainly put them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for watching.